Hi guys, welcome back to How to 911. I'm Sammy.
I'm Erica.
And we have a very special guest, which is amazing. This is like, I'm a little giddy kid right now. I'm trying to learn about this. But we have Ryan with FirstNet with us, and I'm going to let him just take it away. Tell us about yourself, Ryan.
Great. Erica, Sammy, thank you for the time, for letting me come on and share some time with you today. And I'm excited to have a little bit of a conversation. We can talk about a lot of things, either FirstNet or what you all do in dispatch. And thank you again. As they said, my name is Ryan Fields. I'm hail from the Denver, Colorado area. I was actually a captain with the Aurora, Colorado Fire Department for about 10 years. Was a medic, rode backwards on engine 1 for about 4 years. One of the busiest engines, ran about 2,000 calls a year. And a real busy department there in Aurora. And then from the dispatch perspective, our dispatchers had either police or fire. And then of course they would rotate around. I spent 3 years as the Office of Emergency Management Coordinator. That was during 2012. So if you remember, we had the Aurora Theater shooting during that time, which was obviously a catastrophic incident. I'm sure it'll come up today, but you're all very close to Boulder, where we just had that horrendous incident at the consumers in Boulder about a week or 2 weeks ago. So have really loved, enjoyed, thrived within the fire, EMS, emergency management world, and am truly excited to about 3 years to have retired, so to speak, from the fire service and joined on with AT&T because they won the public-private partnership contract to build out FirstNet, which is kind of what we'll talk about a little bit more today. But thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'd also like to point out the fantastic book that you have behind you. Is that If You Give a Mouse a Cookie?
It is. It's on my wall.
I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to set expectations. If you just always give that mouse a cookie, it's going to come back. It's going to want more and more. So it's a reminder as we go through the daily activities. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so FirstNet, will you give us a history of what that is, like why it was created?
Yeah, FirstNet. Absolutely, yeah, Erica, absolutely, thanks. FirstNet really kind of came about as a result of 9/11. So, as the towers were coming down, as thousands and thousands of responders were coming to the scene of the Twin Towers, they couldn't communicate. They were either on disparate radio systems to where they could not talk with police versus fire. They couldn't communicate out to EMS to requisition additional resources. It's very siloed off. Add to it, a lot of the infrastructure was really taken down during that time. So after the 9/11 report was commissioned and came out, that was one of the chief things, and it always is, right? Whenever we do after action reports, we need better communication, and this one really took hold. So all of public safety, police, fire, EMS, emergency management, and most importantly, dispatch came together, right? And they said, listen, we need our own dedicated public safety network so we don't have the same challenges that we faced during 9/11 and events moving forward. So they went to Congress, they petitioned, they said, listen, give us our network. And then in about 2013, they started working on the process, and then through that was passed the FirstNet Act for all intents and purposes. And that said, all right, the federal government is going to say there is a dedicated network, the first responder network, so FirstNet, and the FirstNet network would be built out rather than what they call greenfield, where a company goes out and places all of the towers in the ground nationwide, simply too expensive. So they decided, let's partner with an existing vendor to go ahead and build on the existing network that's in place, the existing cell tower network. AT&T, surprisingly enough, was the only commercial network that actually bid for and thus won the contract to build out that network. So basically, starting from 2017 on, we have our commercial network with AT&T, and then we have a completely separate core network that uses the same towers that's all dedicated for public safety. From the perspective of really what it does, what differentiates it, if you think about, I mentioned briefly the Aurora Theater shooting, right? So that night there were 1,400 people all in each of the theaters. As soon as those shots started, everybody started streaming out of those locations. Most of them were covered in blood, sadly. And what does everybody do, especially in this day and age? They pull out their cell phones, right? They're going to be streaming to TikTok, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, whatever solution that they can start broadcasting to, they're going to do so they can track it. But what does that do to the existing cellular network that's not necessarily ready to handle all of the capabilities and all of the draw on that network? It starts to bog it down. There's only so much bandwidth that can come through the pipe to the tower that's broadcasting. So what FirstNet does is it says, okay, I know that all of you want to stream to YouTube, but public safety has a higher need right now. They need to be able to use their CAD systems as you all are sending their information out to them, to their computers. They need to be able to have their own live video footage that's streaming out back to you in dispatch as an example, so that they can be able to see what's going on. And then all the other data and voice services that they need to use need to have the highest position in the network. So what FirstNet literally does is it takes and it pushes all the people that are trying to overwhelm the network, and it literally what's called ruthlessly preempts them off the network, saying, okay, you can still call 911, but you can't jump on the network for data. That frees everything up. It flows all to its own dedicated core, which is basically the brains of the network that's highly encrypted, highly specialized. And it's basically, as I said, it's their own network, so they can be able to communicate no matter what's happening in the environment around them.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot, sorry.
No, it's really neat, and you can have so many questions from that. So is it being used now? Like, does our agency use it? Like, or do we have to get something special to use that bandwidth?
Yeah, I don't know. Sure. I don't know Loveland in particular. If you're on, I'm not really on the sales arm, so I don't keep track of that. But basically any agency, as I said, police, fire, EMS, dispatch, or emergency management are all eligible. So you get this dedicated SIM card that goes into your phone. It's a FirstNet SIM. So if you're eligible, you can go into a FirstNet AT&T store. Once you get that SIM in, you're on the network no matter where you are to be able to get it. We can talk briefly about it, but there's support as well, right? You all in dispatch, I hope we talk about it a little bit more, but boy, you both have a difficult job, right? Because as soon as something bad's happening on the scene and you've got a police or a fire commander, hey, dispatch, I need this. Dispatch, call for power company, I need this. We need dump trucks, we need sand trucks, right? It all falls on you to be able to requisition those resources. Those are what are called extended primary agencies. They also can be on FirstNet so that they can also be able to communicate when they're going into a saturated environment like that.
Gotcha. So if we're not using AT&T for like our mobile laptops and things like that, would we have to, or we can just get the SIM card from AT&T?
So if you're on one of the other commercial carriers, or if you're on AT&T proper, you will not enjoy the benefits that we kind of discussed of FirstNet. So you would have to either have those devices provisioned on site or with your vehicles or your apparatus. And then once they get that in, they get into provisions, it will work from there. But yeah, it has to be on the FirstNet network because it's on dedicated, it's basically a separate cellular network in all senses of the word.
Gotcha. So how many agencies are on that cellular service?
I don't remember the exact breakdown of agencies that make that up, but you know, it's in, I believe, about 15 or 16,000 agencies that are also part of it. So yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's really neat. And then they're able to talk to each other if all of those agencies could talk to each other.
Absolutely, Erica. And most specifically, they can talk to anybody else. Just like, you know, I have a AT&T phone here versus this is my FirstNet phone. If you all have another carrier, we can still call each other, right? We can still send text messages back and forth. So from an interoperable perspective, there's no interoperability issues whatsoever, like you would have with, say, land mobile radio, right? So Harris sometimes has to have special process to talk with Motorola, as an example. That does not exist. You just have the capability to stay on the network longer with FirstNet because you have those preemption capabilities.
Gotcha.
So this is like nationwide.
Nationwide. All 50 states, 5 territories, and the District of Columbia. That's written into the contract with the federal legislation, actually.
And I don't know if I missed it or not, but when you said this started just because, that sounds awful, because of 9/11, so it kind of branched off from there and is kind of modified based off of other catastrophic events.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that was the impetus. That's what really started it off. But this has been a known need for quite some time. I mean, I keep talking about it, but my two kiddos, 2 and 5 years old, can FaceTime grandma in HD from wherever they are that they can get a signal, right? We all in public safety don't enjoy that same economies of scale to be able to keep up with the technology as it grows, because there's just not as much of a financial incentive, frankly, for some of those companies to be able to keep up with that. So by bringing FirstNet in and partnering with AT&T, everything that the typical user gets and my 2-year-old can get, also they enjoy the benefits of those different resources and capabilities and solutions.
Yeah. How do agencies ask or talk to their people about joining, or how does one join?
I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, you can just go to firstnet.com and they can start getting some of the information and they can dive down into it. I mean, from a sales perspective, there's all kinds of different resources that are available. Like I said, I'm not a sales guy in any way. Really, the reason that I came on personally with AT&T is to help to fulfill some of the other resources and needs that were in the contract. And one, if you want to talk about it briefly, is there is a requirement to have these deployable resources. So they call them ZAxis, which is a satellite-based cell-on-light truck, which is basically a mobile truck that can park somewhere, set up a satellite dish, and it's basically its own cell tower anywhere it needs to be. So if there is a fiber cut or if there's a large wildfire in the mountains west of all of you in Loveland, we can deploy those required within 14 hours to get on site, support public safety, and basically that mobile communications resource no matter where it is or what's going on in the environment. So those are kind of the fun little nuances that go deeper into the FirstNet network that's required of us by that contract.
That's neat. And I really laughed because we did have a huge, so, in Larimer County, the most destructive in Colorado in history or whatnot. And then 7-8 years ago, having the flood where we got, Estes Park got cut off from the world, essentially, when the fiber was cut or destroyed from the flood. So to have those resources would be invaluable, and not just for natural disasters, but maybe like small communities and things like that. If something is happening there, where they have that kind of technology available.
Yeah, it's such a unique situation, Erica, because you remember it obviously very well. But those floods, for those of you that don't know, when you're listening or watching, it basically completely cut off Estes Park from the rest of the state for days and weeks. So we have the capability now to bring in a couple of different resources. We can fly in those solutions to be able to bring up cellular service just for public safety. We have this really cool thing called FirstNet One, which is basically a big blimp, 55-foot blimp that will go 1,000 feet in the air and blanket 100 square miles worth of LTE coverage over an area too, right? So all those different solutions didn't exist, obviously, when that was coming, but there's a lot that is out there based on the capabilities and the requirements from the FirstNet Authority that we're able to bring to bear.
That's so neat. And I'm sure over your career, and I've told Sammy I've done this for 14 years, so it's fun to be like, well, back when I started, but to see that technology grow and evolve over just while you're in the job and like have it, kind of slowly happen, but then to look back and see, oh, wow, like when I started, the very first iPhone was being sold, So, and now we have however many iterations of that and all the different touchscreens and tablets and whatnot. So to see even FirstNet, like you said, the impetus for of 9/11 to grow to blimps and to be able to help communities, that's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, everything that you've seen, Erica, just in terms of how dispatch CAD systems work and the capability to be able to requisition those resources. Sammy, you're jumping into it now and you're going to see a huge change as it comes to, especially E911. I mean, all the different things, text to 911, that's a benefit and a challenge, I'm sure, for both of you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
What like future advances you foresee FirstNet coming to? Because I mean, 911, I'm sure, like you said, text 911. There's like so many things that we can think of that could be the next 911, like video to 911. You know, like all these things. Like, what is FirstNet doing? If you're even able to tell us.
Yeah, there's so much fun stuff that's going around. I mean, you're perfectly positioned, right? Because in Boulder, the FirstNet Authority Labs are based in Boulder, and that's where they do all the cool new tech development. Plus, you've got NIST right there in Boulder, right? All of those agencies are spun up directly to support and build new technology for FirstNet and for the FirstNet built with AT&T crowd. I'll touch on one point, Eric, and then I see you have a quick question. But one of the coolest things, at least from my perspective as a captain with the fire department, when you're at a structure fire, anytime that you have a missing firefighter or a RIC team activation, rapid intervention crew, it's the worst nightmare for an officer on a scene. But two, it can take, as I'm sure you're aware, 20, almost 30 firefighters to just locate that one firefighter, let alone bring him or her out. So we've already developed and are implementing what's called ZAxis, location-based tracking. So you can already tell from your dispatching time, right, where a person is basically within a few meters based on the X and Y where they are. Now what we have the capability to do is have Z-axis, so you know how high they are. So you'd be able to triangulate today where a firefighter is if they're in a building, say 4 stories tall, so that they can be able to say, all right, we need to go to the 4th floor on the Alpha Bravo side of the building, start searching there, rather than taking the time searching from floor 1 up to 4, right? Those capabilities are already in existence. They're already being rolled out, and they were developed as a result of NIST, FirstNet Authority, and the requirements that we have to do so.
That's really neat. I remember at a conference we were talking about that Z-axis and how it's, and it makes sense once they explained it, but thinking that the Earth is not perfectly like this, you know, like we're in the foothills, so we're like, this is this and that. So even I'm sure that technology has come a long way from being like, we're not sure, to you can pinpoint it a little bit better now.
Absolutely. I mean, think about even something like the Yarnell Hill fire. If you remember in Arizona, we lost all of those wildland firefighters. They just didn't have some of the tools available to them to both communicate back and find where their locations are. So we've got very small satellite-based trackable assets where they can carry it on their backpack, use that to be able to call out so they get the situational awareness, while at the same time, hey, maybe we know where they are based on the topography from that. So that's one of the biggest things. How can we both save lives and improve upon our capability to respond? And then make your job easier as a dispatcher as those requests are coming in fast and furious to your locations.
So I'm thinking about, this is all great and we're making all kinds of advances. Is there any downside or something where improvement or something you're still wanting to do with FirstNet? I guess this kind of goes on to what Sammy asked, what's the future?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Erica. I think one of the things, at least that comes to mind immediately, is one of the challenges that we found out right away is what we're doing on all of our towers is, of course, it's open up to all public safety, but we've got this spectrum. It's called Band 14, which is basically another radio that goes on the tower that's dedicated only to public safety, right? So it's kind of their fast lane to the tower. But you have to shut the tower down most times in order to climb the tower and then hang that equipment physically on there because it can be too dangerous with electrical needs, things like that. All commercial carriers, including AT&T, they would just take those towers offline. They would do the work and not tell anybody around or in the vicinity of that tower that it's offline, right? So that's obviously a non-starter for public safety. We can't just take their tower offline willy-nilly. So we found that out early on where, okay, we're taking this tower offline, but we're directly going to be affecting our FirstNet customers. So we actually built out an entire dedicated team that's all they do is look out 30 days from now, how many towers are going offline? Will they affect FirstNet customers? If they do, then we're going to contact the FirstNet customer, let them know, hey, this needs to be done. We're improving your tower. How can we work with you to make sure it doesn't cause you as much harm from that perspective? So just by telling them, that we're working on that. It obviously makes them feel much more at ease. But that was one of those things, how can we continue to improve?
Thinking about, like, we have all this great technology, but we still have that human component. There's still someone that has to go out and touch a tower, and someone who has to look and see where this tower is and all of that stuff. So just like in dispatching, we have all this great technology at our fingertips, but we're still having to talk to someone and communicate that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So our FirstNet towers just used, generally as a radio. I guess, do you understand what I'm trying to say? I'm not as eloquent as Erica. I'm so sorry. But is that something that they use as their radios whenever, and then they just have a specific channel that they can use to go and speak to everybody? How does that work exactly?
It's a great question. And as a previous firefighter, having that LMR radio attached to your lapel while you're going into a fire, that is the ultimate way to keep connected with you in dispatch so you can send help if I get in trouble. So that's not going to, that's a very ingrained need. What we are doing is through those investments and all of the things we've already talked about, there are solutions that exist today. FirstNet Push to Talk is more robust, it's easier to use, and it's more dedicated to be able to have those, person-to-person conversations similar to the radios that we in public safety use. So that's available. There are a lot of agencies that are trying it out to be able to have those communications. I think, if we have this conversation in 3 to 5 years from now, a lot of people will be using, ruggedized phones that also have the push-to-talk capability that has no difference in terms of functionality, reliability, most importantly, from that perspective. But really what's being used now is data. And you all push data out significantly to our MDTs, MDCs, right? And mapping is huge as you're running those wildfires. The incident commander has a planning section chief that is going to be doing tons of data and tons of mapping, having video conferences, right? We're all working remotely. All those different capabilities require a big pipe of data that's dedicated and not brought down based on what civilians are doing. So it's kind of a combination of that. The voice side is there, of course, for phone calls. The push to talk side is there, it's coming along, but really the data is where it's at for now.
So just, I'm understanding correctly, if those towers get overwhelmed, it basically starts pushing away everybody else. So then what happens for a shooting event where 911 is everybody's calling, it's getting overwhelmed. That's still a first public safety thing. So what do we do with that?
Yeah.
Calls?
No, it's a fantastic question, Sandy. So phone calls don't take much in terms of capacity on the network. So if somebody makes a phone call, that packet is really tiny. It's really small. Where the challenge comes in is when they are, like we've talked about, trying to stream or trying to use a ton of data. That's when you're sending those dispatches out via your CAD system, those could get bogged down on the commercial network. So from that perspective, that's really where the improvements come along. But that's essentially exactly what happens, right? People can still call 911, but we'll be able to receive the data that you're sending to us, whether it's a suspect description, suspect video that may have come in, all of those information and all that data will still come through. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
What have we not done, Ryan? And the things that we're very small working that wedge of FirstNet. Is there anything that you're like, oh yeah, they didn't ask me about this, or I definitely got to hit on this or something like that?
We could talk for hours, of course, on it. I think really what's most important is that we are public safety. There's a lot of times you say, right, public safety has all these vendors that always want to work with public safety agencies. We're sanctioned by the federal government. We're sanctioned by the state of Colorado to not be a vendor, but to truly be that partner. So when we're talking about not just the deployables, but, how do we support all of you in dispatch from even, a mental health perspective? That's one of the components that I am working on, just kind of as a side component. I mean, mental health, as you all, I'm sure, can appreciate, is a very large component to how we, function. I mean, I give kudos. I would be remiss if I left this conversation without giving high praise to both you, Erica, and you, Sammy, and all of your colleagues. I think you have the hardest job in public safety. I truly do. You get the call of the frantic person, and then as soon as we show up with police and fire, all we do is say thanks and hang up the phone. You never get any closure, right? So you're going to bed at night, or you're going to bed in the morning, Sammy, when you get home, thinking about, how did that person turn out? How did that person, did they live? How did their child do? Those kind of things are horrendous. I mean, you think about just in Boulder alone, the amount of calls that maybe even filtered over to your PSAP. How do you live with that? And how can we, just as an organization, as a partner to you, help to bring resources to make sure that we both, one, perform better, but two, can sleep a little bit better at night with all of the things that you go to? So again, kudos to both of you. You truly do have one of the hardest jobs in public safety.
Thank you. Thank you. We have talked about that, and there are some people that we've talked to, other officers that we've interviewed, who do see that too. And it's, again, seeing it in the course of my career, that's something that has definitely improved. Can always work on getting better. So we appreciate you saying that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, good. I don't have any more questions.
Great.
Yeah. All right.
I guess that's it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening or watching, guys. And you can check us out on Facebook at Loveland Emergency Communication Center. We have our Instagram, which is How To 911 Podcast. You can email us any questions that you have for ourselves or Ryan, and we can figure out the answers for you. And that email is howto911@cityofloveland.org. And then I think that's it. Well, thanks guys for listening and watching. And as always, know where you are, know your phone number, and tell us exactly what happened.